So, hello everyone. We get started. Welcome to the workshop entitled the Maryland TESOL Handbook for Educators of English Learners. My name is Pam Wilbur. I'm a member of the MCAEL Advisory Committee. And I'm your session host. Today's session will be recorded and all session materials will be made available within 1 week of the workshop. If you are experiencing any difficulties seeing, hearing, or accessing the presentation or presentation features, please private message Tiffany Ross using the chat box. If you have any comments or questions during today's session, please utilize the chat box or use the raise hand feature. Actually, we're going to have questions at the end. You can put them in the chat, and at the end of the meeting, there'll be 10 minutes for questions and you can raise your hand then as well. Following today's presentation, you'll be asked to complete a 1-minute survey. Please stay around after the presentation to do so. Your feedback is very much appreciated by MCAEL. Now it's my pleasure and privilege to introduce you to our presenters, Dr. Drew Fagan and Dr. Luis Javier Pentón Herrera. Dr. Fagan is Associate Clinical Professor of Applied Linguistics and Language Education, Coordinator of the TESOL Program, and Associate Director of the Multilingual Research Center at the University of Maryland in College Park. Dr. Pentón Herrera served as the 38th President of Maryland TESOL in 2018 and 2019. He currently serves as Assistant Professor at the University of Warsaw and as a coordinator of the Graduate TESOL Certificate at the George Washington University. In addition, he serves as the Social Responsibility Interest Section Co-Chair at TESOL International Association. So welcome, Dr. Fagan and Dr. Pentón Herrera. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Pam. Everyone, good morning. My name is Drew Fagan, and I'm joined by my colleague today, Dr. Pentón Herrera, and we are here today to talk about a new publication, a new resource that is now readily available to everyone in the state of Maryland for free, basically focusing on our very vast field of teaching English to speakers of other languages. This field, as everyone knows, is a very global field that encompasses all parts of the world, all age ranges, different first languages, different types of learners from different lived experiences. It's a very vast field and can be a bit daunting for people here in Maryland to think about, well, what is available for me in terms of this field within our state? So a few years ago, Luis, myself, and our other colleague, Sherry Lyons, put together this handbook to have all of the information about the TESOL field as it specifically pertains to the state of Maryland in one location for everyone to be able to view. So if you go to your abstract for this session that's in your program for today, there's actually a link there that will send you directly to the handbook. Again, free access for that. So everything that we're discussing here today, you will have direct access to at that link that you will be able to refer to as well. So as we get started talking about the handbook today, we sort of just want to see where everyone is in terms of what knowledge you already have or would like to get about the field of working with English learners. So our field, here's the book, the front cover of the book. Our field loves acronyms. And if you've been working a little bit at this point, you've probably already seen that there are a lot of acronyms and paperwork at the organizations where you're working at. And very often people from all sections of their careers within TESOL often ask, what do these acronyms mean? And how are they different? And what should we be using? What should we no longer be using, etc.? So we have here 6 acronyms, and we sort of want to give everyone about 2 minutes to just take a look at the acronyms and think about, what do these acronyms stand for? if you could sort of describe what are these acronyms. And if you want to go a step further, you can describe a little bit about how are they different from one another? What are the different meanings between them? So I have 11:56 on my clock. Let's just take about 2 minutes. If you have a pen and paper nearby, if you want to write on your device as well. Don't write in the chat right now, not yet, because we want everyone to have a time to really think about this on their own. So don't write anything in the chat yet. We'll get to that in just a minute. So let's just take about 2 minutes. What do these acronyms mean? ESL, ESOL, TESOL, EL, ELL, LEP. Let's just take about 2 minutes. Just about 1 more minute. Okay, if everyone could please right now, write your responses in the chat, whichever ones you think you know. You don't have to write everything if you weren't able to get to everything, but if you could start putting your answers in the chat a bit, just so we have an idea of where people are coming from in terms of understanding what these different acronyms are. So please go ahead, hit chat, type in ESL equals blah, ESOL equals blah, TESOL equals blah, etc., etc. Okay, we're starting to get some coming in. Okay. Okay, so it definitely looks like we're getting people, at least one of each of these has been spoken for. Fantastic. So everyone seems to have a pretty good understanding of what some of these are in terms of the acronyms. Let's go more specific and talk a bit about why knowing these acronyms and knowing the differences between them is essential for educators who are working with our students. So here you go. Here are how the acronyms are officially broken down. You'll notice that there are slight tweaks between the different acronyms. Pay close attention to the prepositions that are used with the acronyms. Those tend to trip up people a little bit. ESL, English as a second language. ESOL, English for speakers of other languages. TESOL, teaching English to speakers of other languages. EL, English learner. EL, English language learner. LEP, limited English proficient student. It's very important to note that these acronyms are used throughout the state of Maryland, but in very different ways. So this is important because the beginning of our book, of our handbook in part 1, talks a lot about different acronyms that are often used within our field, specifically within the state of Maryland. So ESL, you will find, if it's still being used, is only used in adult education. It is no longer used in the K-12 public school settings. Many people have no issue with the term ESL. Other people do tend to have an issue with ESL because they believe that we are limiting what our students are bringing to the classroom. So English as a second language implies that there's only one other language that our student knows, when in fact that may not be the case. Now, many people tend to use ESL very colloquially, just to refer to any other language that they could be the second, the third, the fourth. But a lot of people are tending to shy away from that term, even though in adult education, that is still the official term from the Maryland Department of Labor for people teaching adult ESL. ESOL, on the other hand, is the official term that is used legally for K-12 settings. So those of you who might be connected somehow with the public school settings for primary and secondary, you will only see ESOL. You will not see ESL. ESL has actually not been utilized in a couple of decades in K-12 for the very reason that I mentioned. It's English for speakers of other languages. How many other languages they have can definitely vary. TESOL is, of course, the field that we are in. So teaching English to speakers of other languages. Again, please note that there are slight differences with the prepositions that are used. English learner, as of 2018 in the state of Maryland, with the passage of the Every Student Succeeds Act, is the official term for our students. ELL is a slightly older term that was used prior to 2018. Some people still use it very often, but for those of us in the field, we view that when people are learning a language, it's more than just the language component. It's cross-cultural communication. It's understanding the ways of education here, specifically in the United States. It goes above and beyond that. So for many people, English language learner, while still applicable in some areas, is viewed as too restrictive of what our learners are actually experiencing. So the word language is now gone for English learner to be used. A very outdated term is limited English proficient. This was used prior to 2018, and it's very much a deficit perspective. All we are doing is we are focusing on what the students do not know. And TESOL as a field is anything but a deficit perspective. We are focusing on the additive notions of what our learners are bringing to the classroom. The fact that our learners have a plethora of lived experiences that they bring to the classroom. So as opposed to focusing on what they don't know, we engage in what we do. Now, why do we even need to know about these acronyms? Knowing acronyms is a form of advocacy. Very often in our programs, educators, teachers, volunteers, tutors, we are responsible for advocating for our learners. And that starts with knowing the correct terminology to use in order to ensure that our students are viewed as providing knowledge to the classroom, as opposed to a deficit-based perspective of what they do not know. And this is all part of part one of the Maryland TESOL Handbook. These are just a sample of many different other acronyms and terms that are commonly used in the state of Maryland with the field of TESOL. So here is the breakdown of the entire handbook. You have our introduction, and then we have parts 1 through 6. What we just did was a small sliver of part 1. What we are going to be focusing on today for the purposes of this conference today is we're going to be really engaging with parts 2, 3, and 4. There'll be a bit of a touch upon for parts 5 and 6, but we won't be going into that in much detail. Again, everyone has access to this Maryland TESOL Handbook for free on the link that is on the program abstract for today. And I believe Tiffany also put it in the chat earlier on, so you can take a look at that. So I'm going to stop talking for a bit, and I'm going to invite my colleague, Dr. Pentón Herrera, to proceed with the next part.
Thank you, Drew, for getting us started. Wonderful. Thank you so much. So as Drew was sharing, we have different parts in the Maryland Handbook TESOL, and I'm going to get us started now with part number 2, specifically in adult education, because every part focuses on K through 12 and adult education, but we're going to be focusing on adult education because that's our population for the conference here. So before we get started with part 2, I want to ask you, where are your students from? What are your students coming from, country, nationality? If you can write that information in the chat box, because we're going to be talking a little bit about student demographics in part number 2. So I'm interested, I'm excited to see if your student population demographics actually aligns with the demographics that we have in the handbook. Thank you everyone. I see here from mainly from South America. El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, Latin America, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Cameroon, Spanish and Chinese speakers, Africa, Iran, Russia, Colombia, Mexico, Western Africa. Wonderful. Afghanistan. So we have a lot of diversity. Honduras, we see it again. Drew, I think we have a general sense here of the country. We see here again El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, South America, Latin America, very much present. Well, we're going to see here now, wonderful. Poland, oh, that's wonderful. Ida, I'm actually presenting from Poland, so that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, thank you all very much for sharing. El Salvador, Peru, yes, wonderful. So part 2, again, is Maryland English Learner Demographics and Programs. And the objective for part 2 is to provide information about demographics of and educational programs for English learners in the state of Maryland. And as I share here, we share all the information for student demographics in K through 12. We're not going to be touching on that for this particular conference, but again, in the handbook, you can read all about it. Also, this is what we're actually going to be focusing on is English learner demographic in adult and higher education setting, which is the second bullet point. And also I'll be touching on types of programs as well. But we can see here a lot of different information. So on the next slide, let's go into the chat box. Actually, let's go through your the countries that you identified, and let's look at these graphs that we have here. Let me start with the right-hand side first, the top countries, because that's the poll. So the first country, not surprisingly, and we can see it also in the chat box, El Salvador is actually the #1, the highest country or the highest population in the state of Maryland, El Salvador. Then we have India, China, and we did see China and Chinese speakers here also in the chat box. China is #3, Nigeria #4, and the Philippines #5. So those are the top countries of origin for Maryland immigrants in 2018. And these are the latest available, when we were writing the handbook, these were the latest available statistics for this population. So also we can see here that 13%, and again, this is on the right-hand side, 13% of the Maryland population were native-born Americans and had at least one immigrant parent. So interesting and good to know that information. More than 2 in 5, or 43% of adult immigrants had a college degree. And I'm gonna go into that graph now on the left-hand side. And then more than 4 in 5, which is 83% of immigrants reported speaking English well or very well. So that's a very high percentage in the state of Maryland. Now on the left-hand side, we see the levels of education of immigrants in Maryland. Again, 2018 was the latest available statistics that we've received from the Maryland Department of Education when we were writing this information. And as we can see here, we can actually see that the percentage of immigrants who have a college degree or higher is actually higher than non-immigrants. It's 43%. Versus 40%. And I'm going to pause here for a second and highlight this particular percentage, because it's important to know, especially as adult ESL teachers, instructors, educators, it is important to know the population that we're welcoming into our classrooms. Many times, for example, when I was teaching adult education before I transitioned to K through 12, I was teaching students who many times were back in their native countries. That were doctors. That were, one time I remember this doctor. She was a doctor with a PhD in chemistry in her native country. And I mean, I was a very young teacher, and I was very kind of a little bit overwhelmed because I was teaching a PhD and I was pursuing my master's. So I was, just very surprised to be teaching a PhD. But again, we do receive students who have very different levels of higher education. So something to keep in mind when we're welcoming all of our students, they might have college or even higher degrees with master's, graduate degrees, PhDs in their native countries. Okay, and then also we can see here some college, 19 and 27%, 27 non-immigrants, 19 immigrants. High school diploma, some college and high school diploma are the two particular statistics where all immigrants have a lower percentage than non-immigrants, but then we see here less than high school diploma. Again, we have a higher percentage of immigrants than non-immigrants. And then in the next slide, we have a little bit of information also about, and this is only one part of the graph, but when you go to the handbook, you'll see more details about this graph. But it's important to know the adult education English learner participation in different programs primarily consisted on ESL programs. 49% of the adult immigrants participated in ESL programs. 40% participated in adult basic education, which are, if you're not familiar with ABE, those are programs that teach basic reading, writing, listening, speaking, just kind of getting their basic education up, some math as well, depending on the programs. Also, adult secondary education, 11%, and usually those secondary education programs, they're tailored towards adults who want to pursue and earn a high school diploma. So we have here 11% of the population. And again, this is 2017, 2018 statistics. And then I would like to take us now to the second poll. And I would like to ask you, what kind of adult ESL program do you currently work at? For example, is it a community organization? Is it a community college? What type of program? Perhaps you have a different name for it. However you call it in your institution, how do you classify or how do you call the ESL program or adult ESL program that you currently work at? If you can write in the chat box, please. A community college, thank you very much. Faith-based, wonderful. Nonprofit, yes. Immigrant rights organization, Literacy Council, Casa de Maryland. So it looks like a lot of, Drew, I see here a lot of community organizations, nonprofits.
Yes,
high
amazing
school.
variety.
Yes, senior center. Oh, that's a new one for me, senior center, wonderful. Excellent, excellent. Well, I think many of the ones that you're sharing are actually here in our slide. We actually, if you go to pages, for example, 31 on 32, 33, and for the remainder of part 2, you'll see, or part 3, I should say, you would see the different types of adult ESL programs in Maryland. And we actually describe all of them. As you can see here, we just list all the programs in our slide, but again, in the handbook, you can read more information about them. We actually have some links that you can actually click on for some of them that will take you directly to some statistics or some programs associated with those programs. And then again, we talk more about all of these programs, what they mean, the difference between all of these programs, the services that they provide. Also, this part 3 and the information about these types of adult ESL programs, actually we provide more details about this in part 5 when we talk about community organizations and the community organizations that provide the different types of programs that you as instructors can share with your students, but you can also use them to support your own teaching, to support your students. So we have many here, and I don't know if, I don't think we have enough time to go over all of them, but just know that we have a lot of diverse programs, as you can see here in the state of Maryland. So I highly recommend checking them out. Yes. Then we go into the next slide here.
Okay, so a question that's often asked with people who are working in various settings with adult English learners is, what type of education do I need in order to work with them? What is necessary for me to be hired or even to volunteer? What preparation do I need as an educator to work with adult learners in all of these various settings that Luis just quickly went over, as well as what people just listed in the chat box. So poll number 3, and this will actually be our final poll for this session, is what type of formal education or preparation, if any, have you had to teach English learners? So this can range from full degrees to online courses to my school gave me a couple of handouts to review. What type of formal education and preparation have you had? So I see CELTA. CELTA is very well known. TESOL Programs as well. Webinars from MCAEL, very good. We have a BS, great. MA TESOL, fantastic. Anyone else? Okay, TEFL, yep, TESOL, public school educator. Okay, so we have some public school certification, MSW, full degree of TESOL certificate. Rose, I'm not sure if you have the full degree of the TESOL certificate preferred, but we're going to discuss that as well. So a lot of people, PD, MCAEL PD certificates, fantastic. So again, even just looking at the people who are here, you're going to see there's a lot of variety. And Montgomery College, very well known for their TESOL certificate. You'll see that there's a lot of variety in terms of what people who are here are already bringing to their teaching settings. Unlike with public school K-12 setting where the education is very streamlined, there's a very specific process that people need to go through in order to become certified to teach in the public school settings. I think I saw someone who said that they were also public school certified. That's quite a very streamlined way of doing that. Adult ESL in general doesn't have that same type of streamlining. And that includes here in the state of Maryland. There are a lot of different ways that you can approach educational requirements and other requirements to teach adult ESL. In the state of Maryland, though, that's quite varied. And in fact, it actually depends on requirements from program to program and teaching context to teaching context. So there's a range of factors that different programs and different teaching contexts consider when they're looking at hiring people. So everyone is in a different setting right now in terms of where they teach. You may be considering other options for the future, or maybe some form of promotion for where you are, or looking at different ways that you can immerse yourself within the TESOL field. So what does that specifically look like within the state of Maryland? So that is part 3 of the entire handbook, which is becoming an ESOL/ESL teacher in Maryland. And again, going back to the acronyms that we discussed earlier, ESOL being the official term that is used in K-12 settings, ESL being the official term that's used for adult education within our state. So as with part 2, part 3 is also divided between the requirements for teaching in K-12 as well as teaching in adult and higher education settings, specifically in the state of Maryland. So everything that we're going to be talking about right now and that's in the handbook could be different if you choose to go out of state and work with English learners out of state. So just bear that in mind, that there might be some differences with that. So a couple of key things I hear. This is actually a graphic that came directly from part 3 of our book. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail in terms of, in the state of Maryland, what is it that different organizations, associations, schools require when they're looking at people to work with their adult English learners. So it's basically 3 overarching areas that we need to consider: educational background, knowledge of standards and competencies with regards to adult English learners, and teaching experience, which is a very, very broad term that is used with adult English learner experiences. So starting with a specific type of educational background, for the most part, the bare minimum that many of these organizations require of their teachers/educators/tutors. I'm actually going to use the word educator because educator encompasses tutor, volunteer, teacher, paraprofessional, teaching assistant. I'm going to use the term educator here. The bare minimum that the majority of organizations require of their educators to work with their adult English learners is at least a bachelor's degree in anything. It does not necessarily have to be in our field or even be in education. The bare minimum is having a bachelor's degree. Now, of course, that can vary from program to program, context to context. Some programs do require a bachelor's degree in some connection to education. Others require a bachelor's degree in some connections to linguistics or languages. And the reason for that is because in the state of Maryland, you will not really see bachelor's programs connected with undergraduate degrees very often. There are very small exceptions to that, but for the most part, our field is mostly a graduate field. So a minimum of a master's, and you'll find that across the United States. Now, well, it's great having that bachelor's degree. What tends to be preferred, and quite a few of you already put this in the chat earlier, what tends to be the preferred education experience is a master's in TESOL. So an MA TESOL, an MAD in TESOL, an MAT in TESOL, whatever master's acronym you go for, an MS in TESOL, that tends to be very often the preferred for going and proceeding with getting people to teach with adult English learners. Now, having said that, very often in the state of Maryland, in reviewing all the various organizations that we have in our state for adult English learners, they will accept masters in TESOL or a related field. What exactly does that mean for the state of Maryland? Well, if you go back to the beginning of part 1, where we talked about the acronyms, the very first paragraph of part 1, we actually talk about how the TESOL field encompasses many different other fields, historically speaking. And it's those other fields that often mean the related fields when you're looking at these job postings or volunteer postings. So linguistics, applied linguistics. Do you have a degree in a foreign or world language? Do you have a degree in intercultural communication, for example? So different things like that are often referred to as the related fields, which is great, which is fantastic. But not everyone is able to do that. Some people want to enter the field in TESOL and work with adult learners. They may already have a master's that's not in TESOL or in a related field. They may have a bachelor's and they really don't have the desire to go on for a master's. So what often can be done to help prepare you for these types of jobs? Well, I saw a couple people mention that earlier. Do you have a bachelor's or a master's in a completely unrelated field, plus a TESOL certificate? Now, one thing which we make very clear in the handbook is the difference between certificate and certification. Certification in the state of Maryland refers specifically to something that is given by the Maryland State Department of Education for someone going into K-12 teaching. That is the only time that the word certification can be used legally in terms of education with regards to TESOL in our state. Certificate is a program that gives you a taste of the TESOL field. It introduces you to the TESOL field, but it doesn't provide you with any official thing from the state government. It provides you with a diploma or with a certificate from the individual program that offers the course. Now, a certificate could be for credit, such as a post-baccalaureate certificate that we offer here at the University of Maryland College Park or UMBC or Salisbury University or elsewhere. Or it could be not for credit. So many other places have like a 6-week course that is not for credit as well. So that TESOL certificate, whether it's for credit or not for credit, plus a bachelor's or a master's in an unrelated field could suffice. Finally, those of you who are interested in working in English for specific purposes programs, so for example, business English, medical English, engineering English, those places very often want to see that you have a degree in the content area plus a TESOL certificate. So do you have a bachelor's in engineering plus a TESOL certificate? Do you have your MBA plus a TESOL certificate? Those types of programs with adult learners, that tends to be what they're looking for. So in the state of Maryland, there is a lot of variety in terms of what's required for education. Now, regarding knowledge of competencies and standards, there are a lot that different associations in Maryland look for. Number one, the adult education teacher competencies. Do you have a basic knowledge of that? That comes from the American Institutes for Research, and that's something which has been often found in a lot of adult ESL programs. The International TESOL Association standards is another example. Are you familiar with what adult learners are expected to be able to do based on the International TESOL Association? The Maryland content standards for adult ESL or ESL that comes from the Maryland Department of Labor is another set of standards that's often utilized across the state. Now, just because you might not have heard of these standards or you might not know them, doesn't mean that you actually aren't already utilizing them where you currently work. But if you are thinking about looking elsewhere or looking up in terms of where you're working with adult ESL learners, one thing that we discovered when we were writing this handbook is a lot of places are wanting to know, do the educators even know where to get these standards or know that they even exist? So something to consider. Final point, teaching experience. You'll see a lot of places with adult English learners are looking for any type of prior teaching experience, but that term is used very, very loosely. It doesn't just mean that you have to be the sole teacher in front of the classroom doing traditional teaching. Volunteering, tutoring one-on-one, working with after-school programs, all of these happen and are considered part of prior teaching experience for us to take into account. So becoming an ESL teacher in Maryland, for adult learners, not as streamlined as K-12. There's a lot of variety that you need to take into account. Look at the specific requirements for the individual programs or teaching context to really help you move on from there.
And Drew, I wanted to add, if we might go back very quickly, I just something that caught my eye when I was reading the chat box here. One of our audience members wrote that actually TESOL is not required in their setting, but gerontology information, because that particular, we have here someone in the audience who works with in a senior center. So it's very interesting to see the diversity of programs, something that perhaps, you know, it can go back to the particular information that they need. Perhaps it's not only TESOL, but TESOL and something else, or perhaps not even TESOL, but particular populations that might need like your ontology experience or experience working with, you know, particular populations. So it's truly wonderful to see the diversity of adult education programs in Maryland. I just wanted to highlight that very quickly and then go into the next slide, because we do have only about 10 minutes left. So thank you very much, Drew. And we want to end our presentation before we invite you to our question and answers. We want to very briefly touch on advocacy for English learners. When we were writing the handbook, we really believed that it was very important to devote a part of the handbook to talk about advocacy. And we explain in this part, is part number 4. We define advocacy as working for English learners' equitable and excellent education by taking appropriate actions on their behalf. And this is actually a quote from the work of Starfener's book. And then we explain why English learners, ESL teachers should advocate for English learners. And for us, this is a part of the handbook we wrote. For us educators, becoming an advocate means speaking up and taking appropriate action for our students and their families when we see something is affecting them. We advocate in favor of them because it is our duty to care for our students' successful development inside and outside of the classroom. And I invite all of you to please take a look at Kirsten's advocacy. We call it advocacy in action. We have a teacher in elementary school, in secondary, and Kirsten, and the 3 of us share our stories advocating for our students. And this really puts in perspective the reason why advocacy is so important in our field, regardless of the population you're working with. So thank you very much. And I think, Drew, we're ready now to welcome question and answers, Q&A session now for the remainder of the time.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Francesca, so Drew, we already have our first question here. Absolutely, Francesca, you have our email information here. You see Drew's email on the left-hand side, and then you see mine on the right-hand side. Please email us with any questions at any time. Absolutely.
This is great information. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you very much.
And again, what we presented here is just a taste of what's in the handbook. There's a lot more information than just the introductory information that we presented here. We definitely recommend everyone, again, go to the link, take a look at everything, see what's applicable to you currently, as well as where you might want to go with the field in the future. There are a lot of opportunities for being in the TESOL field within our state.
Absolutely. Any other questions? Any other comments? Pam, absolutely. So Drew, we have here a question from Pam. I know you don't have much time, but would you be able to give an example of advocacy that you have done for ESL?
Oh,
Yes,
Luis,
and-
you have a great example.
Well, yes, in the handbook, but perhaps should we capitalize on Kirsten's because it's adult education. But yes, we do. I do share one example also in the handbook, and it's more for secondary. But keeping it the focus, keeping the focus with adult education, we see here that Kirsten, when she shares her story, she talks about giving students the opportunity to share their voices. So when they're tailoring their programs and the services that they provide for English learners, for adult English learners, that is in her particular program, she created different ways, different avenues where they could share their input and tell the program what they need so they could tailor the program to them. And so that's a way of doing advocacy in action. But you can read about elementary and secondary school. My particular school, I talked a little bit about the seal of biliteracy, but again, it's beyond adult education. But I talked about how I advocated for my students to be taken into consideration for the seal of biliteracy, but that was for secondary schools. Rosa, thank you very much, Pam.
Yes,
for
Rosa,
that question.
thank you. Actually, I'm very happy that you mentioned that. The great thing about how we did this handbook is that we're viewing it as a living document to be updated often. So we're looking at updating it every few years. And yes, we've already heard from a few people who have said, well, what about this organization? What about that organization? Which, while we were doing the research for this, we were not aware of it. So this is definitely an additional organization that we can consider for part 5 of the handbook, where we talk about different organizations that people can let their students know about as well. So the Ethiopian Community Center is a great one. Thank you so much. We'll definitely take note of that for when we do the revisions in the next year or two.
Yes, thank you. Drew, we have another question. How can we advocate for students if there is a need without intruding in their private lives? And Ida, thank you very much. Ida or Ida, I apologize if I mispronounce your name. So in my experience, Drew, I'm sorry, do you want to take this or do you want me to?
No, please go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. In my experience with advocacy, I always the first thing that we have to do for advocacy, and we actually introduce Heather Linville's and her co-authors 5-step for how to incorporate advocacy in your practice. But the first thing has to be building a relationship with students. So there has to be trust with students. When you talk to them, they will tell you what they need, and you're not intruding. Intruding means that they're not giving you the opportunity to learn about them, and you're forcing your way into their private lives. But when students talk to you and they tell you what they need from you, from the program, then that's not intrusion. That's a trust, a relationship of trust. So the first thing with advocacy, there has to be a relationship of trust. And then when they trust you, they share with you what they need. That's no longer intruding, that's helping them. In many cases, many times, what we see with advocacy is more about their rights than anything else. The programs, the services that they're receiving, they're not adequate, they're not what they need. And that's not necessarily their personal life. It's just the life in the program, in the setting, that it needs to be tailored to their needs, and it needs to be more of an equalizing program for them and services. So again, usually it's not so much related to their personal lives. Drew, do you want to add anything there to that question?
Again, I would say going back to the model that we had in there, as well as our own personal experiences as educators advocating for English learners. It depends on who's initiating the talk as well. If you want to initiate it, then there are some extra steps that in the handbook we do recommend that you take into account. But if the student's initiating it, then that does give some more opportunities to go back and forth in terms of what it means to be intrusive or not. But I definitely would say go back to the handbook, the Linville model that we put in there, very practical. There are a lot of models that are out there with regards to advocating for learners and specifically English learners. We thought about what worked best for us as educators and what would be the most practical for people in the state of Maryland to take into consideration. Definitely go back and take a look at that under part 4, the same area where you saw Kirsten's information, just to help you really reflect on what would be appropriate and when would be, what would not be considered appropriate as well.
Well, thank you so much to Drew and Louise for a fabulous presentation. If you all could join me in a round of applause or some emojis to show our gratitude. This was a fantastic session. So excited that you were able to join us. So here in the chat right now, I am sharing a link to a 1-minute survey. You'll receive this after each workshop today. For each survey, please take 1 minute to complete this survey and share a little bit about your experience today. Your feedback really, truly means a lot to us. And I'll give you a moment to do that. And then following, I will share with you our what's coming next slide so you're prepared for your next session. So again, you can click that link in the chat, surveymonkey.com, surveymonkey.com/r/MCAEL Conference 2022. You can click that link and it will take you to a 1-minute survey. Thank you in advance. So coming up next, you can continue to complete your survey, but coming up next, we'll have about a 10-minute break before our next session. And you can also refer back to your conference program. There are live links there. You just click on the room name, which will be highlighted in blue in your conference program to take you directly to your next session. Or you could use the links directly here in the chat to direct yourself to your next room. So if you're interested in fostering brave spaces for more speaking and mutual learning, you can join the people room. For language is not neutral, practical considerations for, that's a typo, making the classroom anti-racist and inclusive, you can join the power room. And for how to prepare your ESL students for job interviews, you can, well, I'm going to close this room and then you can return to this room. Okay. Thank you all so much for your participation and for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.